What do you do when life presents you with difficult questions about identity, love, and healing? For Reverend Kathi Lockwood, the answer lies in her passion for storytelling and spirituality. As an interfaith minister, Reiki master, and the author of numerous children's books that tackle challenging topics like adoption and addiction, Kathi provides a compassionate and insightful perspective for both children and adults navigating their own journey. Kathy's journey has been shaped by her passion for education and her commitment to uplifting others, earning her accolades such as the Bob Dole Award for the Arts. On this episode, we'll dive into her resilience story and discuss how her faith, creativity, and experiences have influenced her writing and ministry work.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
Hi, Reverend Lockwood. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Hi, I am very, very well tonight, and thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yes. Now, Reverend Kathi, and I hope that's okay if I call you Reverend Kathi.
Or you can just call me Kathi.
Okay. All right. Well, Kathi, can you share a bit about your journey to becoming an interfaith minister? Because that's not a common thing, right? They say many are called, but few are chosen. And so how did you get into being an interfaith minister?
Well, when I think about that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is something that happened to me in sixth grade. I went to Catholic school. I learned about novenas. Novena is you say a prayer like 9 days in a row, and you get what you pray for, I guess, is what the novena is. And in sixth grade, I wanted a dog. I wanted a pet dog, and my family did not want me to have one, but I did my novena, and 9 days after the beginning of my prayers, I was standing in my driveway and jumping rope with my sisters, and I looked down and there was a dog at my feet. And
oh, wow.
I just thought, this is a miracle. And when we experience miracles, we spend the rest of our life searching for a reason why, how, and some kind of understanding. So I guess my journey of spirituality began with that little puppy showing up at my feet and answering my novena prayer.
I love that. Puppies are always cute. So who could resist the opportunity to have a puppy? Now, how do you feel that being a minister, how do you feel like it has shaped your work throughout your life?
Well, I became a minister in 2010. So I had growing up, I always wondered about what was true in religion and whether the dogma was true or not true. And I realized that in all the world religion, that they all basically said the same thing. If you go to the teachings, that we all have a spirit of the divine within us, for instance, that there's a life after death. There are so many teachings that are universal in all the religions, and I wanted to study that and find out what I thought would resonate with me as being true. So I just started that in my teen years, and I'm still studying. So I guess it's a lifelong journey.
I understand that. Now, oftentimes people stray away from their faith, right, during hard times. So in your opinion, how do we kind of stay close to our faith to help us get through those tough times?
Well, that is that's a good question. I can tell you from my experience that after my husband was killed, it took me over 2 years before I could even quietly pray or meditate. Because for those 2 years, when I thought about sitting down and settling my mind to meditate or pray, I would just burst into tears. So it took me time. I never gave up. I always thought that there was a reason for everything. I understand that there's a reason for everything that happens, and that reason is goodness. And that I know that it's goodness because I look at the universe and I look at the world and I look at a flower and I look at the waves of the ocean, and I understand that the essential nature of God and the essential nature of the universe is goodness and love. I can see that when I look around me. So when something happens that's so painful, somewhere in the back of my mind, I always knew and still do know and understand that there's some goodness to be had from that. And my aunt described it to me after my husband died. She said, we're looking at the bottom of his tapestry and it looks like we don't, just a pile of knots and strings, and it doesn't make any sense. But when you look at it from the divine view, there's a pattern to it and there's a beauty to it. So I always understood that there's a pattern and a beauty to whatever happens, even though it appears from our human point of view to be tragic. From the divine point of view, it's part of a beautiful pattern. And even the loss of my husband and various other tragedies that have happened, I've always understood that there's a greater good to be had that sometimes I just can't see it at the moment.
No, I definitely understand that. Now, you write children's books, and you've written a few children's books, and I can tell you that I'm an avid reader. I've been a reader since I was a child. That's when I was introduced to books, and I'm in a book club now, and we read, and it's fabulous when we talk and discuss, and books really open your mind to the world and really help you to kind of think and take on perspectives that are different from yours. And so that's why I really love that you do children's books, because your books tackle some pretty heavy topics like addiction and adoption. So what inspires you to write these stories that address these pretty challenging issues, especially for children?
Well, I wrote my first book back in the 90s when my son, who was adopted, was about 5 or 6 years old. And he came home from school one day, and one of his best friends told him that I wasn't his real mommy. And he knew he was adopted, but he didn't understand what that meant as a 6-year-old. And that was very disturbing to him. And I, like I said just a few minutes ago, I believe that there's like a purpose to everything. And so my belief about adoption always has been that this child came to me to be in our home because that's a divine will, whether that child is born to me or delivered to me through a birth mother. But it was the divine action, you might say, that brought this child into our family. And sometimes it's biological and sometimes it's not, but it is always divine action. And so my book was written to address that divine action with him. I have since realized that, that adoption creates a trauma, that there is a trauma that adopted children, many of them experience, and that trauma is caused by feeling misplaced. And so my book is basically written to heal the trauma before it affects the adult, to look at adoption through a different paradigm and see it as like a positive, this is the way the world is supposed to be, and not a negative thing. So that was the point of my book.
Now you started kind of writing books, and that I guess the inspiration came out of storytelling with car rides with your children, right?
So yes, I have 3 children, and we did traveling to go visit family over holidays, and they would always say, tell us a story. So that sort of like opened up my creativity in storytelling, because I'm driving a car and making up a story as I'm going along the parkway and the highways. And And in order to entertain these children, I had to be spontaneous. I had to be entertaining. I had to have some point to the story. That is where the Christmas story came from, because I have 3 little children at the time. And I wrote the Christmas story with Sammy, Cammy, and Little Lammy, and there were my 3 children. So as I told the story, they identified as each of the kids, and that was where my Christmas story came from. I published that book more recently, but I wrote that story or created that story on a car ride back a long time ago when they were little. So the spontaneous storytelling was very, very good for me to loosen up my whole mind on stories.
Do you think it contributed, like the way that you would tell the story? Do you think that it contributed to your writing style or the themes that you have chosen to explore in your book?
I think I think just making up stories for hours on end and, talking about stories and just allows that fluidity to embrace my mind and allow my creativity to flow. So I might not have told stories because I might have been more too contained within my, I can't do that. But once I was doing it hour after hour after hour, I knew I could tell stories, and they were always loving my stories. So yes, they allowed me to tell a story, but writing the story was a different technique, obviously. I'm sitting down and writing it, but the creativity that was initiated by the storytelling became part of the flow of my writing.
Now, one of your books you just mentioned earlier, which is An Adoption Made in Heaven, and of course, like you said, it was inspired by your adopted son's question. Do you think that writing that book and then help in answering questions, did that help the both of you navigate your feelings or his feelings about the adoption?
I think so. I think that because it's a unique situation, because I had a birth daughter, and then we adopted Dominic, and then I had another daughter. So because the family was mixed, half birth and adopted child, and the way we adopted Dominic was very unusual, and again leans towards my idea of this as a divine intervention. My husband was a very kind man, was sitting in his office. He was a lawyer, and a woman walked in one day, 5 months pregnant, and said, "Mr. Lockwood, I know you're a very good man and a kind man, and I trust you to find a loving family for my baby." And he said, "Sure, I will help you with that," and immediately called me when she left and said, "Kathi, do you want this baby?" And I said, yes. I had had a miscarriage after my last birth. I had a miscarriage before it. I didn't know if I would ever be able to have another child. And here this woman walked in and asked my husband to find a family for her child.
Yeah, I kind of feel, this, I don't know if you ever heard of that. This is a story, but oh my goodness, it's such amazing.
Yes, it was. And she, and we were, so I knew that this was not just some accident that I came upon him, but I think that it was a divine action. And that boy, and then to even clarify that even more, about 2 weeks before he was born, I had a dream where I was holding this chubby little blonde boy. Now, I didn't know if this was going to be a boy or a girl at the time. She never told us. I don't know if she knew. So I'm holding this little blonde baby boy, and he's a real chunky one. And my daughter was very thin and tiny. And here's a big blonde chunky boy in my arms. And 2 weeks later, that was the child in my arms, the big blonde chunky boy. And so there was just the flow, and I knew then that this was part of a divine plan. This was meant to be. This was no accident. And that is, so when I saw him in such pain about me not being his quote-unquote real mother, I already had all these ideas in my head that this was certainly part of the divine plan, and certainly part of, the way our lives want the divine intervention in our lives. And so basically that's the reason why I wrote the book, that he would get the idea that it was divine intervention that was in his adoption. And I believe that that's true in all adoptions.
It just always amazes me how children can be so cruel, but I love how he took something that was lemons and made lemonade. I love that.
Yes, and I've gotten letters from people. I got a letter from a man a few years ago whose daughter's 16 and she still loves reading my book. So I'm very happy with it, because what motivated me was if just one person feels better, if one person feels feels that love that was always there in their heart, and feels that a sense of belonging, if that helped one person feel better, it was worth all the work that I did to put one book out there, which is a lot of work, by the way. But, even if it helps one person, it's worth whatever the time and energy was to do that.
Yes. Now, your latest book, The King and the Monster. And so in this book, you address your son's struggles with addiction. So
Right.
how did you find the balance between sharing such a difficult reality and providing comfort and understanding for children? Because that's a heavy topic.
Well, first of all, my son struggled with this for almost a decade before he finally asked for help. So during that decade, there's an understanding for me that this was an illness that he had. He fell into a trap. He got ill, and now he's seeking health and getting better. And so that's a very important understanding for addiction to begin with. I never felt that he had tried to damage himself like this. I knew that it was a trap. I knew that it was an illness. And whenever I would think about him during the times when he was struggling the hardest, I would always remind myself of him as a 5-year-old boy and his beautiful heart and his beautiful soul and who he truly was outside of the disease of the addiction. So all of my prayers were holding him in holy space. That's the language I used. I would hold him in holy space, even though he was going through the problems that he had. I held him as this beautiful, happy, holy soul as a child, and that was the true him. And with the addiction, it was not him. It was like a cover on top of him. And so when I was asked to write this book for his daughter, those were the themes that were important to me, that the king and the monster is always a wonderful guy. His true self is a wonderful self. He falls into this trap. He starts acting like a monster because the monster has taken over. And then he asks for help, and he gets help from his guardian angels to go to find the healing helpers, and then they take him away and they remind him of his true self. They remind him of his beautiful heart. They remind him of his strength. They remind him of his wisdom. So they remind him of who he truly is during the healing process. And then he returns as he began, as the king, the loving father and husband. And the children, I think one of the most important things for the book is that the children understand that they are not responsible for anything, this whole thing that the father goes through. And in the book, I have an illustration of a shadow in his heart. It's a shadow of sadness or loneliness. And it shrunk when the children were born, but but he was still trying to find something to heal that shadow of sadness in his heart. And that is the illustration I use for the trauma that Gabriel Mate talks about. He's a very famous addiction therapist, and he talks about all addictions are caused by trauma. And that trauma can be something like Dominic's adoption or even generational, something that happened to his parents or grandparents that he's still suffering with. So I have that illustrated in the book. So it's clear that the children see there was that shadow there before they were born. It shrunk when they were born, but that king was still trying to help himself feel better and heal from that shadow that is the trauma that he experienced. And that's what the healing helpers do. They help him heal his heart. And that's essential for all healing, is to find out what is the pain that we try to lessen by searching outside of ourselves. And then when we find that pain, we can heal it.
Wow. I just love when you said that the addiction was not him, it was not your son or anybody who's faced the troubles of addiction, but it's actually a cover on top of him. I love that.
Yes. Yeah. The monster came and then he chased the monster off and because he understood who his true self was, his higher self, the love and the wisdom and the strength of that he was to begin with. So the addiction, it's sort of like I don't like to use the term addict because, when someone has cancer, you don't say they're cancer. You say they have cancer, they can get rid of cancer. And addiction is like that. It's a disease that they can have and they can let it go.
No, absolutely. Now, your work emphasizes the importance of light and love. So can you explain the significance of these themes and how they resonate in your books?
Well, the important thing that I like to demonstrate and have as the background line in all of my books is that, light is the presence of love, the presence of the divine, presence of the energy of the universe. And darkness is not a thing at all. There is a thing of lightness, but darkness is merely the absence of light. And there's no room so dark that you can't walk into and turn the light on. There's no darkness that says, I'm turning the light off. No, the light is something that we all carry within ourselves. And in my Christmas book, I talk about the children have this wild adventure where they go back through time and space and they help the shepherds find Jesus. And when they find Jesus, they say, they see this glow coming out of his heart. And they say, oh, look, he is the light of the world. And then they also notice that he's a little baby and his robes fell off him. And they dare to go near him to cover him up? And they say, well, yes, they realize that he wouldn't have been born a human if God would not have been born in a human body if he didn't want people to be close to him. So they went and wrapped him up, and when they finished, they saw that glow within themselves, and they saw that glow in everyone. And that's the theme, is that we are all live with a divine light inside of us. And Jesus was the perfect example of that. He was the teacher of that. But like he said in the Bible, ye are all gods. We are all divine beings in a human body. Now, in the book, the little girl says, well, what about mean people? And the angel answers her and says, well, mean people might forget who they are, but God doesn't forget them. God is always there, the life force of every human. And so light and life is essential. It's all there is. In the unified field in quantum physics, there's something called a unified field, and it permeates everything and everyone. And so when we learn from our catechism in very early days, the question is, where is God? God is everywhere. Well, then the light is everywhere. And so that's why that's so important.
Yeah, that omnipotence, the all-knowing, that perspective, right?
Yes, that there is our challenge in this lifetime, I think, is to understand the unity of the divine, that we are in union with the divine. And that's why I wrote my Christmas book, because I think when we know that this beautiful, divine, loving life is the source of our life and our world, and we are part of it, then we act differently than when we think that we're evil beings. When we understand the divine that lives within us, then we act more in a divine, loving way, because now we're more in touch with who we are. So that's the theme of the Christmas story.
No, yes, I love that. I love that. And so you achieved recognition through awards and community service, such as serving on many notable boards, including the YMCA, and even being an elected official.
Right.
How do those experiences shape your understanding of resilience and community support?
Well, we do live within a community, and everything is connected. And right now we're in the middle, for instance, it helps me understand what all the good that happens in the world. We're in the middle of our capital campaign, and we need a new building, and it's going to be a $20 million building, for instance. So I'm working with a team of people that are out there, talking to the people where there are foundations, talking to government people who are getting grant monies in. And there's a whole team of people working, and it's a large team. It can be hundreds of people all working with this one focus to build this building so that we'll have like a pool that is not 100 years old, which it is right now. And it will serve the community, because the YMCA is the community center in our town. And we do need a new building. It's very old. And so when you work with people who are always working towards the good of their community, it gives you a better view, because I do talk to people sometimes and they say, oh, this is so bad and this is so terrible. And I'm like, well, I don't know. The people I'm working with are doing really good things because I'm part of the community. Maybe you're just going to have to volunteer to go help somebody do something, and you'll see all these wonderful volunteers out there, with beautiful goals for their community. So it helps, I like to encircle myself with people that are doing good things, and it helps. And they do. I see so many wonderful people doing so many wonderful things for our community. It just is beautiful.
Now, you are a Reiki master. And so for the listeners who may not know what a Reiki master is, can you kind of explain, what is a Reiki master and what are the benefits from connecting with one?
Well, I'll tell you a really short story. So I started doing Reiki over 30 years ago. I had been studying therapeutic touch because I'm more of a scientific person, and therapeutic touch was a healing modality started by Dolores Krieger, and she was a nurse at NYU, and they had double-blind studies that actually showed people could affect the healing of somebody else's body. And so I thought, well, this is a good idea. So I studied that for a few years, and then someone said, why don't you try Reiki? And I'm like, okay. She said it was a lot easier. So I said, okay, I'll go for the easy one. And so Reiki is basically the way it is explained to me is that all of our bodies have a natural healing energy. And when someone practices Reiki or any of these other healing techniques, they open themselves up to the universal healing energy, and they channel it through their body into the other person's body and just helps them heal faster. So my first Reiki class was a Friday night, Saturday, Sunday morning, and it was my daughter's first birthday. So when I got home from that class, I was having maybe 15 people over for dinner, and I was making a big turkey, and it's the middle of the afternoon, and I had my oven door open, and I'm down on my knees basting this turkey, and my daughter, who did not walk at the time, somehow pulled herself up on something, and she stumbled in from behind me and landed as a toddler will with her hand on the hot oven door. And of course, she screamed. This was terrible. They would go plop, and so I grabbed her and I ran her over to the sink, and I thought, the first thought that came to my mind is, oh, my Reiki teacher said Reiki is good for burns. My second thought was I was studying theology and writing about, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So I'm like, okay. So I put her hand between my hands and I prayed to Holy Spirit, Reiki energy. It's all the same energy, I believe, with different words and different languages. And I prayed for that energy to move through me and into her hand, and within a minute she stopped crying and she just picked up a sponge and started playing with it like nothing had happened. So now I was baffled, and I took her two hands and put them together, and they were identical. The hand that landed on the hot oven door was not even red. And so wow, it's one of those things, I wish I could do that all the time with everybody, but there is the energy of Reiki is the energy of love, the energy of divine healing, moving through someone's body, and which is our healing energies anyway. And so I practiced Reiki on all of my children the whole time they were growing up. Every boo-boo was Reiki'd first, and they were fine. They knew what was happening, and so my son, slammed his thumb in a car door, and I Reiki'd it for 5 minutes. It never even turned black and blue, and just went away. So there's our access to a healing energy, and love is the primary catalyst of that energy.
No, absolutely.
Available to everybody.
No,
available to everybody.
No, absolutely. And I know that many people understand that there's power in prayer. And I absolutely believe that, anytime I have the opportunity to pray for someone, I absolutely do so, because you just never know what the power of prayer really can accomplish. So I totally believe in that. And I do believe in the healing power that prayer has.
Yes. And that's why when my son was going through the worst of his addiction issues, I never condemned him. I never said, oh, he's being such a fool, or he's doing something stupid, or he's this, or he's that. I never went there, because that's almost like a negative prayer. Worrying is like a negative praying for something you don't want. So when I would think about him and pray for him, I always remembered who he truly was, not who he was acting out like the monster. So it's so important in prayer to have that positive view of a person as already being healed. That's how Christ did it. When Christ was healing people, he already saw them healed. He didn't see them as sick. He saw them in their true nature of being healed. So that's just another aside on healing.
No, that's perfect. So lastly, what advice would you give to individuals who are looking to foster resilience, maybe in themselves or definitely in their children, especially when facing difficult topics or life challenges?
Well, resilience comes from within. Resilience is a choice, and you have a choice of what you believe, and you have a choice of how you act. And that action that you take is based on what you believe. So do you believe yourself to be strong? Do you believe yourself to be able to do this? Do you believe that you can? And I think the belief in a divine assistance, or belief in the inner strength, we have a choice of our belief systems, and we can choose to believe we're strong enough to withstand this or not. So I think resilience is the application of a belief system that is a positive belief system. And that's how we become resilient. We believe we can do it. And where we get those beliefs, they can come from someone like you, which is the gift that you give. You teach people, you educate people, you give them the strength and the belief that they can have that strength and do that strength to get through these terrible or hard times that they're experiencing. But it is a choice. And there's plenty of people and sacred writings that support that choice. But I would like to say thank you for doing it. Thank you for being one of those people that with the purpose of resilience, because when we know we can do it, that's when we start doing it.
I love that. And I think a lot of people don't realize it is a choice. It is absolutely a choice. I mean, I'm not saying that, you can't cry or get frustrated when you're going through hard times or feel a little down, but at the same time, we can't stay there, right? And we just got to do what we can do to get through.
Right. We can't stay there. But maybe we do need to spend that time there, because maybe there's something we're learning there. Maybe there's something, wisdom to be gained when we're there, but we can't stay there, because that's not who we are. We are loving beings by our very nature. Teilhard de Chardin says, we're not spirits in a physical body. We're not a physical body with a spirit. We are spirits immersed in this physical body. So there's always that spirit there, inner strength there, willing to help us. All we have to do is ask and make the choice to ask.
Well, Kathi, thank you for bringing your spirit and sharing your inspiring journey and insight on this show today. Your dedication to addressing challenging issues through storytelling and your commitment to spiritual growth are truly commendable. So how can listeners find and connect with you or get copies of your book?
Well, my website is booksbykathi.com, and that's a Kathi, booksbykathi.com. And if they want to reach me, it's at Kathi@booksbykathi.com. And my new book coming up is about the survival of the spirit. So look for that. It addresses the death and the survival of the spirit after death. So it's yet another book in its making. booksbykathi.com.
Kathi, do you have any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Yes, I think there was a lesson I learned a long, long time ago when I was a very young child and moved to a place that I did not like, and I was very unhappy. And I stood in my room. I was 10. I stood in my room and I asked myself, what is the secret to happiness? And I went through every single thing I could think of, and then I finally landed on appreciation. And appreciation is still, in my mind, the secret to happiness. Because when we appreciate anything, even if it's a hot cup of soup on a cold day, we set ourselves in the place of gratitude. We set ourselves in a place of accepting good things. And so when we are in our very lowest moment, a good thing to do to help ourselves get out of them is to appreciate whatever it is you have to appreciate. That could be a soft pillow under your head. It could be the sun shining on your face. It can be anything. But when we start living with appreciation as our daily guide, the world turns around for us.
Well, I love it. Appreciation is the gateway to happiness. And so in that, I appreciate your time and the valuable lessons you shared about resilience, love, and light. Again, thank you for being a guiding light for so many on their spiritual journeys and on this episode of Life Jacks, the Resilience Podcast. Kathi,
well, thank you very much.
Yes, and Kathi, I wish you and your family enough blessings and abundance. Please take care. Reverend Kathi Lockwood, everyone, be sure to join me next time for more uplifting stories and insights on resilience. Until then, keep pushing forward, embrace the journey, and remember that every setback can lead to a greater comeback. Dr. Rose, signing off.